I was sitting at home and I was enjoying life as an unemployed person. And I got a call from my friend who owns a temp agency. And he said, I have a job at this really good company and it's moving boxes, 33rd floor to the 32nd floor. Can you do it? I thought I was being really clever. I said, well, how much you paying? And he told me, and I was like, well, I make $1 more an hour on unemployment. So I prefer not to, but if you really need someone, just I would be more than happy to help. And he called back about 5 minutes later. He said, I can't find anyone. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went into this company, interviewed to move boxes. And at the end of the conversation, the woman said, well, you can obviously move boxes. I showed up and it was BCG. I was hired to work for 3 days moving boxes from the 33rd floor to the 32nd floor. Then they kept me for 2 additional days. And then after that, they noticed that I had HR in my resume. They asked me to come in and do some HR work. And from there, that was 15 years ago. And I just continued to do anything that they had. I didn't know anything about BCG. I didn't know anything about consulting, anything about recruiting. I was doing what I normally do, which is, if you need help, let me know.
The Career Show is back with its podcast, and we wanted to begin the season with something big. Hence, introducing a recruiter from Boston Consulting Group. Our guest today is a Southern California native and has recruited for the Los Angeles office of the Boston Consulting Group for the past 14 years. He has processed thousands of applications and has helped recruit hundreds of consultants into BCG offices all over North America. With a lot of ups and downs, he has always found a way to come out on the top, making his journey inspiring for many people. It is my pleasure to introduce Bruce Smolen on today's podcast and discuss with him the journey of his job. You are listening to The Career Show, a podcast that helps you find the right career and inspires you to follow your passion. My name is Trishank Hansrajani, and I'm a student seeking answers to career-based questions that we all have. I'm here to sit down with career specialists and talk to them about the lessons learned during the journey of their career. Hi Bruce, welcome on to The Career Show. It's such an honor to have you.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time out today.
Of course.
So let's start off by talking about what was your major in school, and did that help you decide that you wanted to pursue recruitment as a career, or is it something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
Definitely no. I majored in broadcasting. Well, first I was undeclared, then I tried majoring in computer information systems. I noticed that required a lot of math and a lot of programming, which didn't really suit me well. And I always thought of myself as a creative type, and I thought maybe if I could go into filmmaking of some kind. The closest major I could find was broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up in the broadcasting major. And that definitely has nothing to do really with this. What we're doing now is probably the closest that I've used my degree since I've been at BCG.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to BCG because, as I mentioned in my introduction, you work at BCG. So we'll get to that. So okay. Let's talk about how that switch took place from broadcasting to recruitment.
My first job was doing. I was working for a public access channel, and that an internship led to a full-time job, and this was out in San Dimas. And eventually, there was a crisis in California where they needed to take money away from the cities there, or I was asked to leave. And I decided with my friend that, hey, why don't we just start our own video production company? This was right at a point, and I'm not sure if you're going to understand this, but is a point between nonlinear editing, which is what we have now, and linear editing. And it was just like, in linear editing is the old school. You play a tape, and then you record the section that you want. We didn't really know what we were doing. Both of us were really good at certain things, which was probably like editing and doing camera work. None of us were salespeople. That lasted, we had a lot of really nice meetings and just talking about dreams and future. We had a couple of projects, and we finally realized that this just wasn't going to work out. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized, well, I have to get a real job. So I went and I started working. I worked at a lot of, I temped a lot. And during the course of all those jobs that I mentioned, I got laid off from like 4 of them. And there's a difference between getting laid off and getting fired. Fired is just like when you do something really bad. Layoff is when like financially just doesn't make sense for you to be there. And I've been laid off from my job at Santa Anita because they realized they didn't need a marketing person at that point. And I was sitting at home and I was enjoying life as an unemployed person. And I got a call from my friend who owns a temp agency. And he said, I have a job where at this really good company and it's moving boxes, 33rd floor to the 32nd floor. Can you do it? I thought I was being really clever. I said, well, how much you paying? And he told me, and I was like, well, I make $1 more an hour on unemployment. So I prefer not to, but if you really need someone, just I would be more than happy to help. And he called back about 5 minutes later. He said, I can't find anyone. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went into this company, interviewed to move boxes. And at the end of the conversation, the woman said, who interviewed me, said, well, you can obviously move boxes. I showed up and it was BCG. Wow. And I was hired to work for 3 days moving boxes from the 33rd floor to the 32nd floor. At the end of, sorry to say, but there are 2 other people with me, both from USC, who did not make it past the 3rd day. They kept me, they got rid of them after the 3rd day, which was the end of the contract, and they kept me for 2 additional days. And then after that, they noticed that I had HR on my resume, and they asked me to come in and do some HR work. And from there, that was 15 years ago, and I've continued to I just continued to do anything that they had. You know, I didn't know anything about BCG. I didn't know anything about consulting, anything about recruiting. I was doing what I normally do, which is if you need help, let me know.
You know what? That journey is so unique because I've never heard a journey like that. You started off moving boxes for BCG and now you've been at the firm for 15 years.
Yeah.
And that is incredible. But you mentioned about being laid off, and I want to actually quickly go off topic and actually talk about how do you deal with being laid off? Like you said, you do not get fired, you get laid off because of financial situations around you. And people, especially during COVID, a lot of people have faced this problem. So how do you mentally deal with being laid off?
You're talking about a time in my life. I mean, my first layoff was from the city, and I saw it as opportunity. All of a sudden, this large sum of money, to me, a large sum of money was coming into my bank account. And I felt as though, okay, there's an opportunity for me to do whatever I want to do. At that age, and I think that I always had this impression when I was younger that I could always find something else. At the same time, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, my thing is when I look for a job, I look for something that is going to be, you know, just treat me well and just pay me well. Whereas I think a lot of people who know exactly what they want to do and know exactly where they want to work, they're going to have a harder time because they're going to be looking exactly for those positions. Whereas for me, it was just kind of like I'm still searching for things. And so for me, it wasn't so bad when I got laid off. But yeah, it is a little hit to the ego. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I could always go to temping. If I got laid off in this situation when I'm older, I was just like, well, it would probably be a lot bigger hit for me because you're talking about doing the same thing for 15 years.
Correct.
And now going to another company, and if I try to do the same thing, it's probably like there's a lot of learning that has to be done. But yeah, it's I managed. I survived. So
yeah. So like you said, you've been at BCG for 15 years now, and you haven't moved. So what makes you the most happy about your job as a recruiter at BCG? What keeps you excited?
It's nice when I speak to a candidate and they listen to me and they end up getting a job at BCG. And I'm not saying that everything that I say is, not everyone is going to get a job at BCG. There's a lot of people who probably listen to me and do what I say, but they don't get it. But when I speak to someone when they're a freshman and I tell them, hey, grades are important, and they listen to me and they engage with me, and you know, to hire someone 4 years after you've met them, I mean, that's kind of cool. When you find out later on, this is a quality candidate, because right in the beginning, you just do it because you're nice. You know, you're nice and you just want to have a conversation with them. But later on, you find out that they, you know, they're very engaged and they're doing a lot of cool things and they're keeping their grades up. And So it is nice to see people as their freshmen, meaning as freshmen come in full time. Um, I think the big thing is when they finally get the offer. That's the great part. And when they're excited about the offer, when they're having this like raise their hand moment, which I haven't necessarily had myself, but like yay.
Yeah.
That for me is a cool thing. Also, what I also watch it is these people go through the ranks of BCG and they become consultants and project leaders and principals. And also we have a giant alumni network and seeing them go off to other places and staying in touch with them. But I do enjoy having conversations with students as well, as you know. I like talking to them. I like finding out about them. I like telling them my story. And so there's actually a lot of things.
You spoke about that you start talking to students in their freshman year.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, you realize that they're a quality candidate. So as a recruiter, what makes you think that you have found the right candidate? Because you do get thousands of applications. And this is from a recruiter's point of view. When do you know that you have that perfect candidate for the job? Because you have to select the best for your company.
What I've been told is that we look for energy. This is what we're looking for when we look at your resume. And things are changing now, and we're trying to look at schools differently. Like I believe that there's someone at every school that should be working at BCG.
Correct.
But you can't necessarily go and recruit at every school. But there are some schools that are harder to get into than others. Which probably is an indication that you worked really hard when you were in high school. Test scores are an indication. Were you paying attention in high school? GPA is important because there's a lot of people who don't have to necessarily work really hard, and they just kind of like, those annoying people that just show up and they take the test the last day, and you're like, who is this guy? And what is he in this class, right? So we don't want a person like that. We want someone who works hard. Someone who gets in a class that is not anywhere in their major, but they still want to learn and they still want to get an A, or try their best, right? And so GPAs are important to us because it shows how much energy you have when you're in college. And so when we put all this stuff together, GPA also fluctuates based upon, are you involved in sports? Are you involved in all these other extracurricular activities? Is it an easy major? It should be higher. This is your GPA fluctuating based upon all these things we see in your resume. And so after a while, if we put that picture together, we can see, hey, you know what? For a third of this person's life, they worked hard. And so chances are when they start at BCG, they're going to continue to work hard. I often use myself as an example of someone who moments of brilliance and then moments of just like absolutely nothing. And I had this very wavy energy, but I am motivated by things that interest me. When you're a BCGer, if you put something in front of them that doesn't necessarily interest them, they're still going to plow through it and they're still going to do a great job. And they're still going to, with the understanding that they know this is only for a couple months, this is only for a couple weeks, right? And then I'm going to do work on an entirely different project. But so people who have a lot of energy, who are smart, who can learn things quickly, who are very receptive to feedback. And this is the thing, when I meet someone as a freshman, I don't know anything about them. Just like you could be working at BCG and you could refer me to your friend, say, hey, my friend here is really great and they should be working at BCG, but guaranteed that you probably never discussed GPA with them. You probably never discussed test scores with them. And these are things that I'm not going to ask you when I first meet you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping that you have these things. And I'm hoping that you're going to be more involved in school when you start school. And I won't really find that out until 3 years later when you apply with BCG.
So these are the qualities that you expect out of a candidate: energy, hard work, great GPA, and motivation. But what I want to ask you is, how do you read that through a paper or a resume? How does a recruiter learn to read between the lines? And by reading between the lines, I mean reading between the resume.
Well, I mean, those are some things. I mean, some of them are numbers, right? You see numbers, and those are the easy things. And then a lot of it has to do with you. Some people have issues with their test scores, or they have issues with their GPA, and it's up to them to realize that I can't just submit my resume. I have to speak to someone about this. I have to tell them why. And I think if you have a good recruiter, they're going to want to know, why is this happening? Because eventually somebody somewhere is going to call it out. If you're struggling with your GPA, and someone says, I want to know, what is the story behind this? And you say, well, I had a really tough first quarter, and we look at transcripts and we can see tough first quarter. And then after that, everything is fantastic. So if we eliminate that, you actually have a really high GPA. But it's up to you also. You are the one that has the stories to tell. You're the one that's going to have to come up with the stories, like for your job. You are the one that's going to have to say, this is my, show your effectiveness and your impact in your jobs. And that is something that we're going to see in your resume, but then we're going to call you out on those things when we have the conversation with you in the interview. And that's when you're going to have a good story.
Mm-hmm. So you just answered the requirements of a potential BCG candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to ask you next is that you spoke about case studies. So let's quickly also talk about the recruitment process at BCG. We all know that you have graduate recruitment and off-cycle recruitment and experienced recruitment. But what are the different steps in the recruitment process?
Your first opportunity would be it's called the Growing Future Leaders Program, and it's for Black and Latinx candidates, and it's a sophomore internship. And so that's something that you could apply for that and be a sophomore intern. So you can come into BCG as early as a sophomore. Open to everyone is the junior internship program, and usually BCG is always a year in advance. So in the fall, before you're a junior, you would be applying for this position. And we have first round interviews, which are 2 interviews, and then we have decision round interviews, which are 2 more interviews, which would lead to an offer, which would lead to a 10-week internship the following summer. At the end of that summer, we quite often make those people full-time offers. I would say it's a very high rate of people who get full-time offers out of the internship program. During that time, that summer or that fall, we will then start looking for additional full-time people to fill the rest of the class. And so that fall, we'll be looking for summer and also full-time people. And we will, and if we make offers at that time, we will be expecting those people to start with us the following fall and become part of that class of some former summer associates. Mm-hmm. Then experienced hire, those are usually opened up very, it's kind of like there's a switch more for that. Is there a need? Is there a big business need right now? Let's flip the switch. Let's hire more people. Mm-hmm. As the need stopped, what is attrition like at BCG? Let's everyone's staying at BCG, so let's turn off the switch, right? And so that's something that is that is just kind of like an on and off for that.
Correct.
We also call off cycles inexperienced hire. They're kind of like the same thing.
Right. You said that there are 4 interviews for interns and full-time students. So do you just want to explain how many of them are case interviews and how many of them are general one-to-one conversations?
For everyone now, first round interviews are a live case, or as live as you can get nowadays, which is a Zoom case. And then the other part of that first round is going to be an online case. So you're dealing with a computer, and the computer is giving you information and you're responding to it. The second round, if you make it past first rounds, then your second round interviews will be 2 more case interviews live with more experienced people. So you're talking about partners and principals at that point. Correct. So 3 live cases and then 1 online case.
Interesting. That sounds great. So everyone out there, do prepare for your case interviews. Really hard. But let's switch gears and let's talk about different job responsibilities of a recruiter. You've been talking about a lot about recruiters talking to students and going through resumes. But there are recruiters out there that also do a lot of back end work. So, what are the other job responsibilities in a recruiter's day job?
We do work with our corporate office to figure out what is the best use of our consultants' time. So I quite often go to events in our local schools, and I will go there by myself, and I will talk to students about BCG and all the cool things that we do at BCG. Um, what we Under normal circumstances, a lot of times there would be a consulting staff that would show up. Now, whenever consulting staff does anything, it's in addition to their regular work. And so it is a burden to them. If they spend 2 hours at an event, then they probably have to go home and they have to work 2 extra hours. And we don't want to overburden our consulting staff. And so we quite often, we do look at what can we give to the consulting staff. And so we do plan these things. We call them the commitments. I do a lot of phone calls. I speak with a lot of folks. I plan the summer program, and when I say I plan it, it's always a committee with BCG. It's not just one person doing this whole thing, but coming up with ideas, and then also having guidance from the other members of the recruiting committee or recruiting team, and they will say, I think this is best to do, and this is best to do. And that's usually consulting staff, and so they understand the job better as far as the consulting job. Then there's the actual processing of the applications. This isn't like when I first started, when I literally got applications in the mail and I had to open them up and then type their names into a database and then scan their documents in. Now it's a lot easier, it's a lot quicker, and so we do process those as well. But there's right now we're looking at start dates for when people are going to start with us. People who have already accepted their offers. We're looking at we're doing consultant recruiting right now. We already did associate recruiting. So it's oh, trust me, I'm doing lots of stuff. Trust me.
I'm pretty sure you are. I think the next question could be, what does an ideal day look for you when you're in hiring season compared to when you're not in hiring season?
An ideal day?
Yes.
So a hiring season, I would say that is probably going to be, we do a lot of interviewing on Fridays during hiring season. And everything that we've done building up to the week has been getting ready for that Friday, right?
Correct.
And so it's contacting candidates, making sure that they know where they're supposed to go. All the interviewers know where they're supposed to go. And then when you get Friday, everyone shows up when they're supposed to, and everyone interviews, and there's no dropping off of anyone, any interviewers or candidates. And then you look over the results. You're able to very clearly make an idea of who offers should be made to, and then you follow up with them the following week. And so, but that's the ideal, is when you've worked really hard leading up to that Friday, and then the Friday everyone actually does what they're supposed to do. Yeah, sometimes you can't help it. You have client conflicts. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I remember one time we had your rival school. We had yes, we had people who showed up this was a long time ago, and they looked up online how long it took to get to our office, and it said 20 minutes. And so they gave themselves 20 minutes to get to the office, and they didn't. This must have been before Google was calculating traffic or something, because they were just so late, and it was all four of them. And it was just kind of like, what are we supposed to do? Now they can only do one interview, and it just becomes this giant mess. But yeah, so that is an ideal day during the busy season. During the off season, I was speaking with a lot of students. As you know, I enjoy speaking with students. Having things that are just very, I wouldn't say clearing up things, but just like interacting and just getting to know, because these people, guaranteed, the people that I'm interacting with at this point will eventually be the ones that will get offers. And I think that it does make a difference for you to spend some time speaking with them. And I may have mentioned in our previous conversation, it was really nice when I got an email from someone and they said that because of you, Bruce, I got my summer job.
Offer.
Yeah, and I said, and I looked and I was just like, but we didn't even interview you. And she said, no, my job at Bain in Seattle, it was because of what have you told me to do. And it was just really nice. It was really nice to hear that. That was a good day.
You mentioned that when you care about people, there are two ways to go. One is you get vested into them, or one way is that you help them out, right? How important is it to be emotionally strong so that you do not get vested? Because, like you said, BCG gets thousands of applications. You cannot hire everyone, and you do have to send out rejection letters.
Yeah.
So, how important is it to be emotionally strong when you're talking to candidates?
Well, I mean, it does. I mean, it could work. It could work to your advantage sometimes because you're talking to people and they are the ones that, as I said, you never know who's going to get the job. You never know who's going to be the one. And there've been plenty of times when it's just like all of a sudden they get really excited about a candidate and they say, hey, Bruce, could you call this person up? And I'm like, well, I spoke to them 3 months ago. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why they applied with BCG. I'm sure that's one of the reasons why, because I told them that this is going to be hard and this is what you should do. And so you want to be invested in that way because you want them to, because it will pay off later. And that's not the intentional reason, but it will pay off later on, right? Because they'll realize that. Someone had said that every introduction you meet after an offer is a sell, and every introduction you have before you get the offer is like a friend, right? And so that's why I think it is important to do that. But like I said, if the way that students take it now is just so impressive that I don't feel as bad getting a little closer to them,
Correct.
as far as like sometimes it's really nice because we have conversations at the beginning of our conversation when we spoke recently. We just start talking about other stuff,
Correct. Mm-hmm.
and then we finally get into it's like, why are you calling me? And so it's nice to have those conversations, and maybe it's just a matter of, especially in this age and time, it's just nice to have that talking to a person, and be that person you can talk to. But it's not intentional. It's not because I'm thinking like, oh man, that's going to pay off later on. It's just because this is the person that I am.
I agree 100%. I don't think it's only as a recruiter or when you're working at BCG that it is important to have skills of being invested in someone and being able to have good conversational skills. I think that's important at any given job that you're at. And that's like a universal thing, if that makes sense. Earlier on, you mentioned that a good recruiter is someone who tries to dig deep into a student's resume. So I just want to ask you, what makes a good recruiter a great recruiter? I always ask you what makes a good consultant a great consultant, but today I want to ask you what makes a good recruiter a great recruiter.
You're asking a good recruiter what would make me great. It's in some cases I think it's time. The time that you give to students. You could legitimately be in a job like this and just not, realize that a lot of it is processing. It's processing applications. It's making sure letters get out on the right time, that people are scheduled, all this stuff. But spending the time with the student, I think that is. But you know what? I mean, same results, right? You could be that person who is, who is just like the process person, and you could get you get the results, right? You get the people, you've hired the people, and then you could be that person. I mean, we still have to process all the stuff, but you can also spend time with people, and I think that the job is not just hiring folks, it's also after they get hired, you want to be there as a resource for them.
100%.
You want their help when it comes down to, okay, now I have to find the next group of people as well. You want them to feel very much at home when you're doing the summer program, and you want to, you want to be the person who is there, that in case they're like, I have a question that I don't really know what to answer, ask anybody. They can always go to me or someone in our department and ask them. So, are you saying that that's what makes me a great recruiter? Is this what
Exactly, being accessible.
Is this what you're getting to? Is this what you're getting?
Being accessible, and since you've always been accessible, that makes you a great recruiter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm a great recruiter, but I think that I keep on going back to I truly do care about the people that I speak to. And even when we're talking about like, hey, here's my application, and it's just like, what could we possibly, in spending legitimate time, like what could we possibly do for this person to try to give them the best chance at BCG? And that could be like, it's not going to happen now. It may happen 2 years from now, but what can we do? And brainstorming and trying to figure it out, and leaving the conversation with a plan,
So it's been an incredible podcast. Bruce, we have learned about your journey. We have learned about what a recruiter's life is like and what is it like to work at BCG. And now I want to ask you my last question, and that is, what is one advice you wish that you had received before you started your journey?
I think listening is a big deal. And I want to go back to when I decided to start my own video production company. And I remember getting advice from my brother-in-law at that point. And my brother-in-law was an accountant, and he said, "This is what you should do." And I just didn't listen to him, and just because I knew better, And it's just like, what could this guy possibly know? What could this accountant possibly know? But he was right. It was like one of those things where I should have waited and purchased stuff earlier as opposed to later when I wasn't making any income or something like that. I mean, people give you advice because they want to save you, right? They want to save you from the pain. And I often tell them that, BCG is like your parents. They will give you plenty of advice. The only difference is you have to listen to them, because they're probably writing it down and they're probably going to call you out on it later on and say, we told you this, right? But if I would have, I think that hard work, realizing that a lot can be accomplished with hard work, listening to people and not making those mistakes because they've already made the mistakes, but actually listening to people and saying like, hey, you know what? They are smarter than me, and therefore they're giving me good advice, and they're going to save me a lot of heartache, right? And also just receptive to feedback, which is also very much a BCG thing. When people tell you something, it's not because they're trying to be evil or mean, but they're actually trying to make you better.
But it is important, like you mentioned, to listen and work on the feedback. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey, Bruce, from lifting boxes 15 years ago to recruiting students for almost a decade now at BCG.
Yeah, you know what? I was just so happy that when we moved 4 years ago, that I didn't have to move boxes. I was just like so happy that I finally didn't have to do that this time around. But
well, you've come a long way, and I think that is inspirational. That's something new I learned about today, and you've earned even more respect than before. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure this is going to help a lot of consultants and a lot of recruiters. Thank you so much, Bruce.
You're welcome. It was very nice. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. Okay.
I hope you enjoyed this week's career discussion. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot.